Every day you make choices. Some are small: what to eat, what to say, where to go. Others shape your relationships, your work, your future. But what if your ability to decide wisely isn't just about logic or knowledge, but about how you experience the world itself? William James, the father of American psychology, believed that decisions are not mechanical calculations. They are lived acts of will, expressions of character, temperament, attention, and belief. In this video, you'll explore how James's revolutionary ideas about consciousness and volition can help you make decisions that are not only smarter but truer to who you are. James rejected the fantasy of pure rationality. He saw that every decision involves feeling, habit, uncertainty, and risk. And rather than trying to eliminate these elements, he showed how to use them to transform indecision into movement, confusion into clarity, hesitation into commitment. Learn why attention is the foundation of freedom, why small choices shape who you become, and how to recognize when a decision is not just practical but existential. You'll discover how to navigate life's uncertainties with a philosophy that honors complexity without paralysis. This isn't self-help. This is a deep psychological and philosophical practice, a way to live more fully, more consciously, and more courageously. Smarter decisions are not about knowing more. They're about becoming the kind of person who can decide. Are you ready to master your will, not by controlling life, but by responding to it with clarity and depth? Let's begin. The moment is small. You're standing in line. You're staring at a menu. You're weighing two messages, two responses, two directions. No thunder, no spotlight, just a choice. And yet, somehow, it matters. Because in that decision, however minor, there is a reflection of who you are becoming. William James saw this not as trivia, but as a field of battle, the field where character is shaped and life is quietly written. He believed that every decision, no matter how simple, is an expression of what he called the will. Not in the sense of brute determination, but as a living intersection between attention, emotion, habit, and belief. He studied these moments obsessively, not because they were dramatic, but because they were real. They reveal the truth of human freedom. Not abstract, not unlimited, but deeply personal. To choose, James insisted, is to affirm a direction, to lean into one possibility over another, to say, this matters more than that, and this affirmation is never neutral. It echoes into the future. For James, smarter decisions are not necessarily more informed. They are more engaged. He challenges the modern illusion that with enough data, we will make perfect choices. That's not how consciousness works. We decide with our whole being, our moods, our memories, our instincts, our hopes. Every choice is a microdrama of the self. And the self, James tells us, is not static. It is in process. That means every decision is also an opportunity, not just to solve a problem, but to shape who you are becoming. James says, our acts of choice are the turning points of our conduct. And so, the question is not, what's the smartest decision by someone else's metric? The real question is, what does this decision say about the person I am trying to be? Take a moment from your life, something recent, something ordinary, a conversation you postponed, a project you abandoned, a truth you didn't tell. Why? Not what excuse you gave, but what felt at stake. James invites you into that interior theater where decision happens. It is not neat, it is not logical, but it is real. And in that reality lies your power, because here's the paradox. Your decision precedes your certainty. You often don't know what's right until after you commit. The evidence arrives because you acted. James calls this the faith ladder. First you imagine, then you hope, then you act as if. Then you believe. Then you become. This is not irrational. It's the most human thing we do, but it requires courage. James was under no illusions. He knew that decision invites risk. It is a leap into ambiguity, and that leap can provoke fear, hesitation, paralysis. But he also believed that refusing to decide is itself a decision for stagnation, for drift, for the erosion of will. So, smarter decisions in Jamesian terms are not about safety. They are about integrity. They align your outer act with your inner aspiration. They move you, however slowly, toward unity. They honor the self in motion, not the fantasy of a self fully formed. If this idea stirs something in you, if it feels like truth spoken from deep within the fog of modern indecision, then let that feeling matter. Like this video, subscribe. Let this be more than thought. Let it be an action, a choice, a beginning. Because as James knew, the first step is always the hardest. And always the most real. There is a hesitation that feels like drowning, not a dramatic crisis, but a slow paralysis. 1,000 options circle your mind. You weigh them, you analyze, you rehearse. And yet nothing happens. The moment passes. The chance slips. You remain still. William James called this the tragedy of indecision, and he did not dismiss it as weakness. He saw it as a crisis of the self. What happens when the will loses its center? When the mind, flooded with competing motives, forgets how to move. He understood this not just as a psychologist, but as a man who had lived it. His own life was marked by long periods of doubt, inertia, depression. He knew what it was to be caught between possibilities, unable to act. And out of this struggle came one of his most profound insights. The will is not just about choosing. It is about interrupting hesitation. James wrote that the function of the will is to hold fast to a thought which but for that effort of attention would be driven out of the mind. In other words, the will is not some force that descends in moments of clarity. It is the muscle of focus, the refusal to let go of what matters, even when everything else demands distraction. To make smarter decisions, James argues, you must first decide what to attend to. Because attention is the channel through which the will acts. What you focus on grows. What you neglect withers. Your life, he insists, is shaped not by what happens to you, but by what you choose to give your attention to, and this is where the modern world becomes dangerous. Not because it is evil, but because it is overwhelming. Endless options, constant inputs, infinite comparisons. And in the midst of it, the will becomes diffuse. The self fragments. Decisions become performances rather than expressions. James offers a radical alternative. He says, stop seeking the perfect choice. Start seeking the true one. The one that resonates not with your ego, but with your core. The one that, even if uncertain, feels alive when you consider it. This kind of decision requires not more information, but more self-trust. He points to the fact that most decisive people are not those who calculate best, but those who commit, who say yes or no with a clarity that emerges from within. They may be wrong, but they act. And in acting, they discover who they are. For James, this is the essence of maturity, not the absence of doubt, but the ability to choose in spite of it. He urges you to recognize that your deepest truths will not always arrive in logical form. They will appear as inklings, intuitions, tensions in the chest. And your job is to honor those signs, not dismiss them. Because your decision, he reminds, U.S., is not only about the present. It is a rehearsal for the future. Each act of will strengthens or weakens the next. If you choose avoidance today, avoidance becomes easier tomorrow. If you choose courage today, even in small things, courage gains ground. So pause now. Think of something you've been postponing. A call, a message, a step forward. Ask not whether you are ready. Ask, what part of me wants this? What part of me is afraid? And which part do I want to feed? James would say, feed the part that believes. That acts. That leans into life. Because ultimately, the smartest decision is not always the safest one. It is the one that makes you more real. You wake up. There's a dull weight in your chest. The day stretches before you, already full of questions. Should I speak up? Should I stay? Should I try again? You don't say these out loud, but they're there lodged beneath the noise, shaping your mood, your posture, your choices. William James understood that life is not made of answers. It is made of options. And among them, some are what he called genuine options. These are not theoretical puzzles. They are lived crossroads moments where you must choose, and the choice cannot be delayed without consequence. A genuine option, for James, has three features. It is live, meaning it truly matters to you. It is forced, meaning you cannot avoid it. And it is momentous, meaning your choice carries weight, changing what follows. These are the moments where life does not ask what you know, it asks who you are willing to be. Most decisions don't feel this dramatic, but many of them are. Silently, they shape the trajectory of your days. Whether you speak or stay silent, whether you forgive or hold on, whether you take the risk or retreat. Each time, you are offered a path not just of action, but of identity. And here's the critical point. You cannot wait for certainty. James insists that if we always wait until we know, we will never move. The data is never complete. The outcomes are never guaranteed, but the world moves anyway. And so must you. He writes, our faith is faith in someone else's faith. Meaning, much of what we decide rests on what others have risked before us. We trust, we leap, we act not because we are sure, but because we choose to participate in the unfolding of life. This is where James's philosophy becomes electric. He is not asking you to be reckless. He is asking you to be awake, to recognize that some choices are not about knowledge, they are about courage. And the smarter decision is not the one that feels safest. It is the one that calls you toward more life. So what happens in the face of a genuine option? You hesitate, you analyze, you stall. This is natural. But James says, at some point, you must affirm. To affirm is not to predict. It is to stand for something, to declare with your action that this is the future you are willing to live into. He gives the example of friendship. If you withhold trust until you are sure the other person loves you, you may never experience real friendship. But if you choose to believe, you act differently, and that belief creates the very condition for trust to grow. The decision precedes the outcome. This is what makes decision so powerful. It is generative. It creates new realities, new paths, new selves. When you act from a place of integrity, your action doesn't just reflect who you are. It makes you who you are. So think now of your own life, not the big things, the quiet ones, the decision you've been postponing, the truth you've been afraid to speak, the commitment you've delayed. James would say, this is your genuine option, and no one else can choose it for you. So ask yourself, what kind of person do I become by choosing this, and what kind of person do I become by refusing it? Because in the end, the smartest decision is not the one that guarantees success. It's the one that grows your soul. There's a certain kind of silence, thick, electric, paralyzing. It comes just before a major decision. Your body is still, but your mind is chaos. You go back and forth. You imagine the consequences. You replay your fears. And beneath it all is the question you dare not ask aloud. What if I'm wrong? William James spent his life studying that silence. He believed that in the heart of every decision lies not just uncertainty, but vulnerability. We hesitate not because we don't know, but because we're afraid of what the decision will say about us. Afraid that a wrong choice might expose our weakness, our ignorance, our need. But James didn't pathologize this fear. He treated it as a sign of aliveness. To hesitate is to care, and to care is to be human. He wrote of the strenuous life, a life lived not in ease, but in depth. A life in which choices are taken seriously because they are irreversible. You don't get to rehearse life, you decide. And then you become. James's philosophy demands a profound form of maturity, the courage to decide without being sure. To act not because you have all the answers, but because you recognize the cost of not acting, the cost of drifting, of waiting, of letting life slip into a pattern of avoidance. And this is where the real test emerges, not in the complexity of the decision, but in the clarity of the self. James says, choose not based on external rewards, but based on the kind of inner alignment the choice will bring. The smartest decision is the one that pulls your fragments into a whole. He asks us to listen, not just to reason, but to what he calls the voice of the more, the sense that a certain path, even if uncertain, feels right, not easy, not guaranteed, but right in the deepest sense. And here, James makes perhaps his most dangerous claim. Sometimes, belief must precede evidence. Sometimes, you must choose as if the outcome matters in order to make it matter. This is not wishful thinking. It is existential responsibility, because decision is not about control. It is about commitment. And commitment is the birth of meaning. So James invites you to ask not just, what should I do? But, what kind of meaning do I want my life to create? And what decision would affirm that meaning, even if no one else sees it? This question is not for the faint of heart. It demands that you stop outsourcing your authority. It demands that you treat your life not as a puzzle to solve, but as a canvas to paint. And in this view, every decision becomes an act of authorship. You are not merely reacting. You are writing the script of who you are. So the next time you find yourself in that silent, electric space between options, remember, fear is not your enemy. Fear is the threshold. And on the other side of it is authenticity, not the easy life, but the real one. You're sitting at a crossroads. Not the dramatic kind, with flashing lights and grand choices. No, this one is subtle, invisible to everyone else. It's whether to send the message, whether to try again, whether to let go. These are the decisions that don't make headlines, but they build lives. William James knew that the weight of life is not carried in rare epiphanies, but in these quiet junctions of the will. He taught that every choice is a stroke in the painting of the self. And the smartest decisions are not always about success or failure, but about integrity. He writes, if you care enough for a result, you will almost certainly attain it. But this is not about magical thinking. It's about alignment. About the kind of energy that is released when your action and your desire are no longer at war. The decision, then, is not just effective. It becomes truthful. James places enormous value on consistency, not as rigid adherence, but as coherence. Do your choices reflect what you claim to believe? Do they mirror your values in motion? Or are you living divided, performing oneself in public and another in silence? This is not a moral indictment. It's an invitation. James is not asking for perfection. He's asking, does your decision help unify you? Does it pull your thoughts, your emotions, your will into a single stream? When it does, behavior changes. Not because of discipline, but because of clarity. The person who once hesitated now moves with steadiness. Not because they are free from fear, but because they are focused. James saw this again and again in the people he studied, those who, through religion, art, suffering, or love, discovered a center from which to act. And when they did, their choices gained momentum. Their lives gathered shape, and this is the secret. Smarter decisions don't just solve problems. They generate momentum. Each aligned action makes the next one easier. The fog begins to lift. The future begins to feel like something you are creating, not reacting to. But James also warns, the opposite is true. Choices made in dissonance out of fear, conformity, or avoidance fragment the self. They weaken the will. They make the next decision harder. This is why he treats even the smallest decisions as sacred. So ask yourself, right now, what is one decision you've been postponing, not because you lack information, but because you fear what the choice will ask of you? James would say, that's the decision that matters most, because in the end, the smartest choices are not the ones that minimize risk. They're the ones that maximize coherence, the ones that allow you to live not just more efficiently, but more honestly. And if that thought stirs something in you, if you feel the pull to live with more alignment, more decisiveness, more depth, then let this be more than an idea. Like the video, subscribe, share it with someone who's at their own crossroads, because every act of belief shared creates more life. It's late. The world is quiet. You sit alone with your thoughts, no notifications, no noise, just the slow unfolding of awareness. And in that stillness, a strange clarity emerges. You have more power than you think. William James believed that the human will is not merely the capacity to choose between options. It is the ability to create direction when none is obvious. It is what allows you to say, this matters, even if no one else sees it, even if the outcome is unclear. He called this the effort of attention. And in his eyes, it was the most important psychological act a person could perform. Because what you attend to defines your reality. It organizes your priorities. It structures your emotional life. It builds your behavior choice by choice, moment by moment. Most people don't lose their way because they lack intelligence. They lose their way because they stop attending to what matters. They drift, they react, they surrender to the urgent, rather than the meaningful. James offers a counter-philosophy. Learn to curate your consciousness. Learn to bring your mind back again and again to the choice that reflects your deepest values. The smart decision, in his framework, is the intentional one. The one that resists distraction, resists panic, resists the lazy slide into what is merely convenient. This is not romantic. It's discipline, and it's exhausting. James admits, the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. This is the inner work behind all outer clarity. You want to make better choices? Start by noticing what you are actually attending to. When you're scrolling, when you're stressed, when you're stalling, what has your mind? What does that focus produce in you? Because decision does not begin with action. It begins with attention. And attention, over time, becomes identity. James is ruthless in this. He warns that if you let your attention drift aimlessly, you become the kind of person who cannot decide. Not because you're incapable, but because you've trained your mind to obey only stimulus, not value. But he's also hopeful. Because the will can be retrained. Every time you bring your mind back to a chosen object, an intention, a task, a belief, you strengthen the very core of agency. You become, slowly, someone who can choose again. This is the Jamesian transformation, not spectacular, but steady, not flashy, but real, a life slowly sculpted by what you consistently return to. And eventually, your choices begin to carry a different weight. They don't feel reactive. They feel aligned. So pause and ask yourself, if my attention creates my future, what should I be noticing more and what should I be willing to ignore? Because the smartest decision isn't just about what you do, it's about what you're willing to keep focusing on. Even when the world tries to pull you away, the world doesn't stop. It presses on. Deadlines arrive. People expect. The inbox fills. And in the swirl of urgency, one truth hides in plain sight. Most decisions are not made with reflection, they're made with momentum. William James knew this. He observed that much of what we call choice is actually habit, not in the shallow sense of routine, but in the deep, psychological sense of neural grooves formed by repetition, strengthened by use, reinforced by identity. He called habit the enormous flywheel of society, the force that keeps us in motion when our will is tired. And in this, he saw both danger and hope. Because if your habits are unconscious, they rule you. But if you can see them, if you can take them seriously, you can begin to reshape them. And in doing so, you change not just your behavior, but your very capacity to decide. This is the forgotten layer of decision-making, not the single act, but the conditions that surround it. You don't just choose in the moment. You choose in advance through what you practice, what you tolerate, what you repeat. James offers this brutal clarity. Sow an act, and you reap a habit. Sow a habit, and you reap a character. Which means the smartest decisions are rarely dramatic. They are quiet affirmations of pattern. They are investments in a future self. But how do you change a habit? Not with grand declarations. James says, start small. Change what you do with your attention. Change the story you tell about yourself. Change the action you take at the edge of hesitation. Every time you resist the easier path, you train the will. Every time you return to your intention, you sharpen your edge. This is not instant. James was not naive. He knew that change is slow, that the self resists interruption. But he also knew that the will, once engaged, is plastic. It learns. It adapts. It grows stronger with use. So begin here. Think of one decision you make daily that shapes your day more than you admit. It could be the first thing you reach for in the morning, the words you use in conflict, the way you choose silence over expression. What habit lives beneath that decision? And more importantly, what new habit, if you could install it, would make the next 100 decisions easier, not harder? James believed this is where true wisdom lives, not in avoiding failure, but in designing your decision space to support the self you want to become. Smarter decisions don't require more intelligence. They require better defaults. There's a specific kind of fatigue, not physical, not emotional, but existential. It creeps in when you've made one too many decisions that didn't feel like yours. When you've said yes to things that asked you to shrink. When you've said no to moments that might have made you whole. William James understood this fatigue. He called it the deadness of routine. Not the routine of structure, but the routine of inauthenticity, the accumulation of choices made in fear, conformity, or self-forgetting. And what he discovered is as sobering as it is liberating. The will doesn't die in crisis. It dies in drift. That's why James called for awakened choice. A kind of decision-making that is not reactive, not borrowed, but existentially honest. Decisions that express, not suppress, your deepest intuitions. Not because they promise success, but because they are true to the self that is struggling to emerge. This kind of choice demands introspection. Not the sterile analysis of pros and cons, but the brutal clarity of asking, why am I really doing this? What is this decision affirming? And what part of me is afraid to choose differently? James was a psychologist of thresholds. He knew that behind every great decision is a crisis of identity. You are not just choosing between actions. You are choosing between versions of. So pause and ask yourself, If my attention creates my future, what should I be noticing more and what should I be willing to ignore? Because the smartest decision isn't just about what you do, it's about what you're willing to keep focusing on. Even when the world tries to pull you away, the world doesn't stop, it presses on. Deadlines arrive, people expect. The inbox fills. And in the swirl of urgency, one truth hides in plain sight. Most decisions are not made with reflection, they're made with momentum. William James knew this. He observed that much of what we call choice is actually habit, not in the shallow sense of routine, but in the deep, psychological sense of neural grooves formed by repetition, strengthened by use, reinforced by identity. He called habit the enormous flywheel of society, the force that keeps us in motion when our will is tired. And in this, he saw both danger and hope. Because if your habits are unconscious, they rule you. But if you can see them, if you can take them seriously, you can begin to reshape them. And in doing so, you change not just your behavior, but your very capacity to decide. This is the forgotten layer of decision-making, not the single act, but the conditions that surround it. You don't just choose in the moment. You choose in advance through what you practice, what you tolerate, what you repeat. James offers this brutal clarity. Sow an act, and you reap a habit. Sow a habit, and you reap a character. Which means the smartest decisions are rarely dramatic. They are quiet affirmations of pattern. They are investments in a future self. But how do you change a habit? Not with grand declarations. James says, start small. Change what you do with your attention. Change the story you tell about yourself. Change the action you take at the edge of hesitation. Every time you resist the easier path, you train the will. Every time you return to your intention, you sharpen your edge. This is not instant. James was not naive. He knew that change is slow, that the self resists interruption. But he also knew that the will, once engaged, is plastic. It learns. It adapts. It grows stronger with use. So begin here. Think of one decision you make daily that shapes your day more than you admit. It could be the first thing you reach for in the morning, the words you use in conflict, the way you choose silence over expression. What habit lives beneath that decision? And more importantly, what new habit, if you could install it, would make the next 100 decisions easier, not harder? James believed this is where true wisdom lives, not in avoiding failure, but in designing your decision space to support the self you want to become. Smarter decisions don't require more intelligence. They require better defaults. There's a specific kind of fatigue, not physical, not emotional, but existential. It creeps in when you've made one too many decisions that didn't feel like yours. When you've said yes to things that asked you to shrink. When you've said no to moments that might have made you whole. William James understood this fatigue. He called it the deadness of routine. Not the routine of structure, but the routine of inauthenticity, the accumulation of choices made in fear, conformity, or self-forgetting. And what he discovered is as sobering as it is liberating. The will doesn't die in crisis. It dies in drift. That's why James called for awakened choice. A kind of decision-making that is not reactive, not borrowed, but existentially honest. Decisions that express, not suppress, your deepest intuitions. Not because they promise success, but because they are true to the self that is struggling to emerge. This kind of choice demands introspection. Not the sterile analysis of pros and cons, but the brutal clarity of asking, why am I really doing this? What is this decision affirming? And what part of me is afraid to choose differently? James was a psychologist of thresholds. He knew that behind every great decision is a crisis of identity. You are not just choosing between actions. You are choosing between versions of, and if this video helped illuminate that path, if it helped you feel less alone in your uncertainty and more powerful in your agency, then let it matter. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with 3 friends who are also standing in the quiet, listening for their next move, because no one decides alone.